Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us here at the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Today he happens to be in D.C., and I'm glad to see you, Daniel.
It's good to see you, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. I guess you stayed up all night and watched the debates and then analyzed the debates, and now you know everything there we need to know about the debates. Is that right?
Well, the first part of it's true. I did actually stay up late watching it and thinking about it, but I don't know that I know that much more than when we started.
All I know about some of this campaigning, since I've been through a few, it's rather frustrating. It's sort of sometimes like the Fed. They make an announcement, and immediately after they make an announcement, they start agitating. What are they going to do in 6 weeks or 8 weeks? It's immediately concentrating on the next move. Well, this is what I thought was happening during this campaign. As soon as the election was over in 2016, it must have been the earliest time ever. Who is the front runner? Who is the front runner? It's been going on, and of course it takes a long time. But when I thought they were overdoing it, that people are getting tired of this and knew so much about it, I was entertained with somebody on social media, and there were a couple who did this. They tweeted out, "Is Jeb Bush related to George Bush?" so I thought maybe there are still a few people out there trying to figure out what was going on. But it was a fascinating event. It was a long event. I've been up there, and 3 hours would have been very trying, but there were a lot of breaks. And somebody asked me already, who do you think was the winner? And of course, everybody has their own winner. But I think CNN might have been the winner of this because, it's a lucrative deal. And I've always been fascinated that we as candidates just go along with this. They set these things up. They control everything. They control the questions. So I think that there's a tremendous advantage here. But what I'd like to do today, Daniel, with you is talk a little bit about what we might have done or what we might have ask the questions differently than those who are indoctrinated by a certain philosophy on economics, and they all agree on a certain philosophy of foreign policy, both those who are asking the question and most of the candidates. So today I'd like to sort of think of what kind of questions would we ask? I know you do a lot of special work in foreign policy. Do you think you could have come up with something a little bit more creative? What would you have liked to have learned from these candidates in something more specific about their views and what we're doing in foreign policy today?
Yeah, it's funny, just back to what you said earlier. I was looking at the press coverage this morning of the debate, and it really was so lacking in substance. It was all about now it's Carly Fiorina's time to rise and to be the new front runner, and it's almost as if they're treating it like a reality show or a sporting event. It's really quite funny. But one of the things that struck me is thankfully there were a couple of the candidates who spoke out against the Iraq War and said they were against it, and some of them were even skeptical about the next wars. But what really we didn't hear much of is many of the candidates talking about being against the next war. It's easy to say when the reputation of the Iraq War as a failure, but none of them few of them seem to have learned at all from that. And I would have asked them about the military budget and how we can be the greatest country in the world and spend so much of our national treasure on the empire. And that just didn't come up.
No, I think that's right. And they call themselves fiscal conservatives. The deficit's in a runaway state, and yet we keep spending. And a lot of Republicans, they didn't take a poll last night, but a lot of Republicans are really hip on getting rid of sequestration, which is a token little bit of restraint on military spending. But I heard several times last night that that we have to rebuild the military. Obama has let the military run down. Well, I think the military spending has gone up, and you might qualify that, but I think the spending has been going up with Obama, and we've expanded our commitments around the world, and it's not like we're vulnerable. It's not like we haven't spent enough money. I mean, compared to other nations, what do? We spend close to what everybody else spends together.
Yeah, I think that really is one of the great falsehoods that they were able to get away with last night. in condemning the so-called sequester, they pretended that Obama was gutting the military budget, whereas, as you've often said, and it's absolutely true, it's been confirmed by the facts and by figures and study, is that the sequestration does not reduce the military spending at all. It simply slows the rate of increase. So there's been no gutting of the military, at least in terms of finance. If you want to talk about what guts the military, it's wasting trillions of dollars on things like the F-35. But of course, that doesn't come up either. But I was going to ask you, Dr. Paul, I know you were watching with a close eye on the discussion on economics. Was there something on monetary policy or economics that you were surprised it didn't come up that you would have liked to have seen discussed?
I think it would have been pretty interesting to ask him about, is there an important event occurring tomorrow, which is today, with the Federal Reserve, and that has to do with interest rates. That never even came up. So that's a problem. I think the Federal Reserve obviously is very, very important, and it relates to the spending we have in the military because it facilitates the spending, it facilitates the empire. And yet, what about even just the audit the Fed? Do they ask about this? Why aren't you for audit the Fed? Why aren't you championing this cause? Why aren't the people told about what's happening? Or you could ask them about the Fed and say, whose interests are best served by the Federal Reserve? Are the people's interests served by the Federal Reserve? Well, Andrew Jackson didn't necessarily think the central bank would serve the purpose of the people, and that's why he got rid of the national bank. I thought it was interesting. One candidate, when they asked him, "Who would you put on the currency?" He said, "Well, I'd certainly take Andrew Jackson off and put on Hamilton." He loved Hamilton. He hated Jackson. And I thought, oh boy, a Hamiltonian against a Jeffersonian is very clear cut, but not too many people pick up on that.
Yeah, I did hear that, and I was astonished too. I have the luxury of a DVR here, so I rewound it and listened to it a couple of times because it was hard to believe. But it's kind of a trivialization, wasn't it, to talk about whose face you'd put on the currency, and it just sort of gave the whole show a feel of a reality TV show rather than debating some of the critical issues that our country's facing in the future.
Yeah, I think the format, I guess under the conditions that we have, it's better than nothing. You do get to see people, but it's so canned when you think that there's not that much philosophic disagreement, either with the individuals interviewing or the candidates or even the political parties. So I would like to have sorted out more. How do you differ from the Democrats on your foreign policy? Is it the same? Do you think we should maintain an empire? Is it a wise thing to think that we can actually conquer Afghanistan? We're still there, and we're still very much involved. But pin them down and say, do you believe in the American empire? Or do you say that we don't even have one? Then why are we in 150 countries? The other question I wouldn't mind finding out from them in detail is, why is it so easy to mellow on what hasn't happened in the past, like, oh yeah, I didn't like that Iraqi war. At the same time, they, for the most part, express a lot of hostility toward Russia and Iran, as if they are the monsters of the world, and they never take it in context and compare it to what we may be doing. So yes, there's a lot of imperfections in the world, but it seems like our people, our leaders, and ourselves, our responsibility is to correct our mistakes and not pretend that we know how to correct everybody else's mistakes by ignoring our own problems. I think that is so misleading.
Yeah, it was interesting. Most of the candidates seem to want to outdo each other in terms of a more masculine response to foreign policy. Of course, whether it was men or women on the stage, I think it was Rubio who was talking about how he's going to deal with that gangster who's running Russia, and he's going to confront him. I mean, does he even understand the implications of such an aggressive foreign policy in today's situation? Who is advising these people? We talked about this on a previous show, Dr. Paul, that a lot of these candidates are getting their foreign policy advisors from the same organization, the John Hay Initiative, that's run chock full of neocons. And what they do is they send in advisors to each one of these campaigns, and that's why they all sound the same. So I think, that's what we're getting. These people have not given foreign policy a lot of thought. They're basically outsourcing it to a neocon shop.
You know, Rand and Trump don't have a whole lot in common, but last night Rand acknowledged one thing on immigration, but they also are the only two that don't go to that think tank, and so they have a little bit more independence on their foreign policy. Whether or not they agree on foreign policy is another question, but at least that they haven't been sold out that they have to go to the neocon think tank. You know, there's another domestic issue that, an issue that's dear to my heart for several reasons. That has to do with the drug war. And they did debate that and just talked about it, and they talked about it in the context of what the federal government obligations were as well as the state government. And it was a lot of, you know, inaccuracies and not very precise as far as I was concerned. But you know, the one thing, and I think it was Fiorina that you know, had a emotional, impassioned plea that the government has more responsibility because it's so dangerous. Well, the issue there is not the danger of the drugs. Of course, drugs are dangerous, and of course, prescription drugs are the most dangerous, and that's where all the addictions are. The biggest dangers sometimes come from the FDA pumping drugs out there. And the other thing is when the subject of immunizations come up, I would have certainly brought up the idea of the drug companies behind here pushing all these immunizations. But you know, the drug war is a freedom issue. I detest so many prescription drugs; they're way overused. But the so-called bad drugs, yes, they're terrible. I never wanted my kids and grandkids to use them. I think they're terrible. But it's a freedom issue, because once you concede that it's the government's responsibility to protect us against ourselves from making bad decisions, the ball game is over. Matter of fact, when you use that argument, well, under these circumstances, you know, Christie would probably accept this. Well, there's at times you need the government to protect us because it's so serious. Yes, it's so serious, and that's probably why we should have individuals making decisions. But why wouldn't it be legitimate to compare this to the liberals' argument about registering and controlling guns? Guns are dangerous, they kill people, and therefore we should have stricter regulations, you know, for safety reasons. But no, they do this, they pick and choose. Yeah, so on drugs we'll regulate a bit, on guns we wouldn't regulate them, and then the liberals come back again. So this is probably my frustration on looking at the whole concept of liberty and the role of government. And then all of a sudden, if you had a precise understanding and a role for free market economics, you'd have a different understanding of monetary policy. It would be so different. So I would have liked to pose the questions like, what do you think is the precise responsibility of the government, in this case, the federal government? What is the responsibility of the government? You know, I would predict that from what I hear in discussions in Congress and elsewhere, especially since 9/11, they say the main thing that the government has to do is make us safe, give us security. We have to have our economic security, and we have to be physically safe. But you know, even that implication is not in the Constitution at all. They gave us the Second Amendment and a few other things which implied that maybe we have our own responsibility. Of course, it reminds me of Franklin's admonition that, you know, if you sacrifice your liberty for your safety, we end up with neither. So I think I think that total principle would have been good to have a little bit of discussion on.
Yeah, it's interesting that Fiorina was talking about, you know, the tragedy, and it is a tragedy of her son whose life was destroyed by drugs, but then she wants to make that as an emotional reason to ruin the lives of many other people that are taking drugs by putting them in prison forever. You know, right. Both of them ruin their lives, and it's a great point you make about prescription drugs. I was just reading this morning that they've decided now that these antidepressants really are not appropriate for young people to be taking. You know, and these are things that have been approved for so long. So there is a danger of legal drugs and prescription drugs as well.
You know, and I think this is true, and I've learned a long time ago not to blindly accept the official medical position, and I don't want to look like I'm singling out any one individual for claiming the medical profession is for all these immunizations. But the instincts of a lot of people on immunizations have turned out to be right. And once again, why is it that we can't make our own decisions and decisions for our children? You know, there was one other subject, and you may have heard it, and I didn't, and I missed it or something, that the subject of education. Of course, you know, I'm big on education. I think educators are more important than politicians. That's a question I might have asked him too. Who's the most important? Philosophers who teach what the role of government ought to be, or politicians. So the question is they frequently say, well, we won't do this and this, and what we need is more education. When they talk about more education, they mean government education, and that will correct things, and then they can get jobs. They'll say, well, they don't have jobs because they're not well trained. Well, they want the government to do this, and it hasn't gone well. I mean, the Department of Education at one time in 1980, that was the rallying cry of Reagan to get rid of it. So we come up with all these compromises. Well, we won't take over the schools, but we'll just loan them the money. Now we have somebody running on the other side, Sanders. He says education should be free. Well, nothing is for free, but they're always indicating this responsibility. Here the students already owe $1.3 trillion. Half of them aren't paying their bills. Why should the other half pay it? At the same time, they've just recently said you can get a loan easier 6 months sooner than you used to be able to get it. So I don't know whether you caught anything on education, but my guess is that you didn't see any reason to be too optimistic that they have much of an understanding about which direction we should go on education.
You know, many of the candidates kept going on about how they want to emulate Reagan. They're going to be the new Reagan, the Reagan policy. Well, they're probably right in that case, because Reagan came in promising that he would abolish the Department of Education, that he would be shrinking government and doing all these things. And it turns out he did the opposite. So they probably will be emulating Reagan in a way, making a lot of big promises, and then nothing good happens when it comes to cutting government.
Well, if I'd have been in that predicament, haven't been there, when you hear those questions, you don't go through my, what would I say, what would I say? But I tell you what, on the Reagan thing, and I think I did it in the debates before, is that I think the most astounding thing that Ronald Reagan ever did, and the best lesson ever, was his reconciliation with his mistake he made in Lebanon with 242 Marines being killed. By admitting he made a mistake, admitting that said that he would never turn tail and run, but he finally came around to understanding the irrationality of the politics of the Middle East, and he should have never gone in there, and therefore he said, if I had done that and had been more neutral in the situation, those Marines would be alive today. That should be Ronald Reagan's quote. The recognition when he made a mistake and Americans died needlessly. Nobody wants to talk about that. They want to talk about Ronald Reagan, being forceful. And the extreme of this is when Reagan bombed Libya, needlessly, which just further antagonized, and we're still in a mess with Libya, as if that had solved the problem. So, that is the type of intervention that I just think is just so difficult for me to understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to Liberty Report. And although I talked about the reports and haven't been there, and even pretend I would give a different answer, I want to let you know I'm not nostalgic for it, because it's a difficult job to do that, to run. And of course, I had the satisfaction at the time that changing people's minds and hearts on the issues of war and peace, and also on monetary policy and sound economic policy. But overall, trying to get a message out about individual liberty, that to me made it worthwhile, because I did get to visit with a lot of young people, and I'm still in touch with many of them, and they still know the difference between a free society and an authoritarian society. And right now, they're also very much aware of the need for us to move in the direction of a free society and reject the notion that we need more authoritarians in Washington to tell us how to run our lives explain how and run the economy and tell other countries how to run. There's a large number of people who do understand that. I just hope someday that through the educational movement that the conventional sources of where people get their information, whether it's TV, movies, or other politicians, that they will realize there is an option. And we were introduced to this option many years ago by the founders, and we experimented with it, and we developed tremendous wealth and a huge middle class. But we have to be very precise. What should the role of government be? It should be there to protect liberty and not to assume that we have some magical cure to make you always perfectly safe and secure, because the only way that can be even attempted to be achieved would be with the sacrifice of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.